forward now so we can get some of our most profound
That's right.
and theories.
It all ends right now.
This is Mark Dustin and Kevin Bauman, and this is our podcast, Help Is Not on the Way.
Mm-hmm.
And we're bringing to you today a few interesting stories that we've come across that we think are worth talking about. I have an interesting one about a young German gentleman who showed up in the middle of a little German town about 102, almost 200 years ago, and with mysterious circumstances. And Kevin, you've got something for us today too, don't you?
Mine requires less math, fortunately. Not our strong suit. Mine is about some teenagers who find themselves adrift.
Very adrift, from what I understand.
Very adrift, yes, very both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, as most teenagers.
Right,
somewhat
exactly.
Adrift. I remember being quite adrift myself.
Yes, I think I'm still adrift.
Well, I think I want to start with mine, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this is a really, really, really cool story. And the first time I actually came across this story was there's the director Werner Herzog did a sort of a reenactment type film about this guy. It was years ago, and it's by far not his best work, but it's an interesting story, and it's about this guy named Kasper Hauser. This takes place in around 1828 is when sort of the story starts, but Kasper lived from what we believe was September 29th, 1812 until December 17th, 1833, and one day, which is May 26th in 1828, Kasper, this boy, appears in the middle of Nuremberg, Germany, in the town square. And he's looking disheveled and a little bewildered and somewhat incoherent, not making a lot of sense. Holding in his hand with him, he has an envelope. And inside the envelope are two letters. One letter is dated 1812 and is unsigned, but appears to be from his mom. And this letter states that his birth date, which is why we know September 29th. And it also claimed that his father was in the cavalry and in the army, and he had died, and that the mother could not take care of him anymore, and he was being sent away and for someone else to raise.
Now, was this the German military that his father was in, or do we not know?
No, yes. Actually,
okay.
I think it was a sort of a local regiment to the area. Yeah, I think there was some specific about it being like the 6th Regiment or something, which is actually a little bit relevant because the second letter is from a person who claims that they actually raised the boy, and it's anonymous. And that person basically states that they came across or discovered the boy or had the boy and decided to teach him how to read and write and to teach him the Christian religion, and sent him to but this person was the one who was in theory, based on the letter, was sending him, like, couldn't take care of him anymore, and was now sending him off for someone else to take care of him, and it was actually addressed to the local captain of the local 6th Regiment cavalrymen. What's interesting about that is that the letter actually said that along with raising the boy, this anonymous person also didn't let him, quote, take a single step out of my house, like the entire time he was being raised.
That's odd.
Now, at this point, just to make it clear, he's about 16 years old. So from birth until now, he has not, based on the letter, not been let out of someone's house, right? But he has been taught to read and write. Now, there's a lot of inconsistencies in the story, so you're going to have to bear with me here because it's going to kind of jump around.
Mm-hmm.
But the letter also stated, which it literally said, the letter further stated that the boy that it directed to Captain von Wessingen, that he wanted that captain who was in the town and the leader of that regiment now to take the boy in to teach him to become a cavalryman like his father, and it asked the captain if he wouldn't take him in to hang him.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's they really cared about this boy.
Yeah, well, you've taught him to read and write and raised him in the Christian religion, and now if you guys can't take care of him,
you can just kill him.
You can just hang him.
Yeah, I guess times were different.
Times might have been. Were they?
Right. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Well, Maybe you're right. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to be optimistic.
Right.
So later, although it was determined by, I don't know, experts of varying degrees that these letters were probably both written by Kasper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This guy, this guy's still an enigma. Nobody really knows what happened, or who he was or where he came from. But the connection to our story, actually, or to our title of our show, actually, it starts off with a later claim that he had, which I'll bring up in a moment. The help is not away. But in a sense, it also sort of turns into this bizarre mental health thing, which I don't think anyone could help this kid, because of who he was. And
it sounds very, I mean, it would be very odd if the story that he was telling through these letters was true. It's even more, maybe more mysterious if the letters aren't true and he wrote them. I mean, and if it is just a big mental health thing, I guess that might explain it all.
Well, and I mean, if you consider this kid's at 16 years old and he somehow he did appear in this town center, and he became, as we'll find, well known, and nobody kind of went, "Hey, I know this kid. This is my kid," or
right.
Like nothing. I
so
mean,
where did he come from, right?
We don't know. I mean, we don't. He definitely was German, because he spoke the language. But that's only a sort of. I'll have to get to that too, because he did and he didn't speak the language. But then it's based on what do you believe. So he was taken to the house of Captain von Wessenig. And when they sort of when the captain sort of talked to him and whatever, the people were around, and they realized that he really could only speak a few words. He could say his name, but then he only repeated over and over again the words, "I want to be a cavalryman as my father was," and then he would say horse, horse. And if anyone asked him anything else, tried to delve any deeper, he would get really agitated, continuously repeating "don't know." And then it would just devolve, and it became quivering and useless. So
probably not going to become a cavalryman.
Yeah, I don't think that he's probably there yet.
Yeah.
Maybe he's got some growth issues to come overcome if he's gonna. Well,
exactly. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they just send you straight to the front line.
I don't think there's a war on it. Well, there probably was, but I don't know if there's a war on at the time. I don't know if they were digging this deep,
right,
for these kind of this kind of manpower. And he's also, I don't know what, 16. I don't know if they took people at 16 at that point, but
times were different.
As we've established. He was taken to the local police station, where he continues to show a really limited vocabulary, and then so they just don't know what to do with him, so they imprison him, and they just call it under the vagabond laws, and so he's put in prison, but it's not like. I mean, it's like in a castle. I don't know what the prison is, but it doesn't sound very prison-y. He definitely was locked up. Okay. It wasn't some sort of like...
But they didn't hang him.
No. Yeah, so apparently they immediately didn't listen to the rules of the letter. He didn't get to be a cavalryman, and he wasn't hanged. But he wasn't... doesn't seem to be treated poorly at all. In fact, I think they treated him fairly nicely. And for the next 2 months, he's in prison there. And... it's noted by his jailer and some visitors that he's pretty healthy. He seems pretty smart. One person considers him intellectually impaired, but overall people kind of say, I don't know, this kid's doing okay. And he seems to be learning at a really fast rate. Like he's learned German, reading and writing German, which again is very strange because the first letter said that, or the letter from the anonymous person said that they taught him to read and write, but he claims he can't read and write, or can't speak, but he does and can't really tell them much, but he does seem to learn quite quickly, and has quite an incredible talent for drawing. In fact, there is at least one drawing I've seen that he did, and it was really good. So he appeared to have also no knowledge of manners. And he would only eat and drink bread and water during his time in prison, and all other foods he wanted nothing to do with. So he's there for 2 months. It's assumed at first that he was grown up sort of half wild, but as he begins to open up and starts to get his language back or bring his language out and things like that, he starts to tell this really, really, really bizarre tale. He tells the people that again, not really in line with the letter. He tells people that he actually has spent from his earliest memory, he has been held in a really small cell, like so small that he wouldn't even be able to stand straight up in it. And it may be about 1 meter wide and maybe 2.5 meters long. And he's been in this cell in the dark, pretty much in the dark, for like his whole life, as long as he can remember. I believe it's chained to the floor too. And every morning he would wake, and he had a straw bed, and every morning he would wake up and there would be bread and water next to his bed. And he would sometimes drink the water and it would taste weird. And those nights he would sleep like super hard. And then when he woke up, his straw had been changed and his hair had been clipped and his nails had been clipped.
Wow.
So like he was being drugged.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the strangest.
Like maybe they considered him a wild animal, kind of, almost. And the only way to take care of him was to lock him up and drug him to take care of him.
Maybe that's it.
Or maybe he's making it all up. Who knows?
Maybe he's making it all up. Well, that and that does come up a little bit later on because, people start. What's weird about this story? One of the strangest things about this story is that people believed it, and for a really long time, like people kept kind of believing what he was saying, and instead of asking the questions like, well, if a human being was in a box all of their life with no sunlight, wouldn't there be health issues? Wouldn't they be deteriorated? Wouldn't they not have like muscular structure,
right,
and not be able to see? And then the whole conflict with the letter that says a different thing. But people seem to kind of want to go along with this, or at least some semblance of it. Basically, it seems like people wanted to know, were interested, and even though he would say things that were conflicting, they didn't seem to mind because they seemed to chalk it all up to some sort of mystery that they were excited about and could get involved in. People were bored, maybe. I don't know. Wasn't a lot to do.
I mean, it is an interesting story either way.
It is an interesting story either way. You're absolutely right. So he also claims that the only human being during this entire time that he saw was towards the end of his imprisonment, and that person revealed themselves to him and began, but didn't reveal their face, and began to teach him how to write his name by holding his hand and writing it with the pencil over and over again. And then also teach him the phrase, which he didn't know what it meant, but he was taught how to say the words, "I want to be a cavalryman as my father was." And then taught him to be able to stand upright and walk, because he's been in this,
right.
Presumably he's been in this cell for all this time. And now all of a sudden he has to be able to learn how to walk, which again, atrophy, the legs would not have had the muscular structure, et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds a little bit wonky, but people kind of went with it. And
it seems like any combination of these things are plausible.
Sure.
Like the letters could be written by somebody else and still a lie.
Yeah,
they could have been written by him and be true or a lie.
That's true.
Everything could have been made up or a combination of made up and true. And
well, and I guess that's probably what people were doing. People were probably being generous to the fact that this kid has been through something and we don't know what it is, and whatever he's doing here, we don't know what we should probably. I mean, I guess that's giving people credit. That's probably what the intention was. They are the adults and they're trying to help, and
sure,
So after being in prison for a couple months, the town of Nuremberg adopts him and takes charge of him and decides they're going to assign him a house to live in and be educated and things like that. And along the way, of course, this isn't a local story. This story spreads internationally. I mean, this story becomes news. I mean, it's pretty substantial worldwide news. It's a very interesting story, and very people were into it. So he becomes something of a little bit of a star in his own, in a sort of celebrity kind of way, but an infamous sort of I guess sort of a reality TV kind of star, So moving forward, and also as the stardom as this sort of celebrity starts to rise, he sort of seems to start to really like it and kind of be drawn to it and start acting in ways that trying to draw the celebrity back to him, right? So he seems to be this is starting to evolve here.
He's kind of digging this notoriety.
He's digging it.
Yeah.
He's digging it. So on October 17th, 1829, he is staying with this teacher named Friedrich Daumer, and he is found, and he doesn't come up for lunch or something like that from his room, and he's found in the basement of the house bleeding from a cut on his head.
Oh, on his head.
On his head. And he claims that he was actually sitting on the toilet, and a hooded man came in and said to him, quote, you still have to die ere you leave the city of Nuremberg. And then the man hit him on the head with something, some sort of like device. And Kaspar says, interestingly, that the voice of the man was the same voice as the man who taught him how to write and walk and dropped him off in Nuremberg.
That is totally crazy. And I mean, maybe he was always in Nuremberg.
Right. Nearby.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, because he wasn't walking more far if he had like wonky legs.
Right, yeah. He just learned how to walk, and he walked like, 100 miles or something.
Could have walked any short distance. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so in theory, he probably was nearby. And that actually, so later, this actually is a good point, because that incident fueled rumors that had already begun, and the rumors state a couple things. Someone thought that he was royalty in Hungary or something like that. Then they came up with this idea of him being English royalty of some sort or from England. But the most substantial rumor was that he was the illegitimate son of Charles, the leader of the royalty, local royalty from the House of Baden. I forget the guy's full name. It's and the rumor is that he was the legitimate hereditary prince, because the legitimate hereditary prince had been born around the same time, 16 years earlier, that Kaspar would have been born, but had died, or said to have died, a month after birth. Well, the rumor becomes that Kaspar is the actual hereditary son, that another child was put in his place that had died, but the uncle who would have inherited the throne, except for Kaspar being the next male heir in the way, the direct blood related heir in the way, would have to, the uncle would have concealed Kaspar, substitute another child who had died for Kaspar, and put Kaspar in this little dungeon and kept him there.
Wow.
So
no,
that he could have the power. The Uncle Louis, I think it was.
This conspiracy theory is much more fun than the other ones I was coming up with.
Yeah.
I like this.
Yeah, it speaks to like if you start putting the clay into the hands of the people,
right?
They can mold one heck of a great story.
Yeah, it's getting pretty interesting.
It's getting really interesting, and so now, of course, Kaspar's been attacked. This changes the landscape. So he is taken to the local authority. He's at the teacher's house, but now something has happened to him. So they take him to this teacher's house they take him from the teacher's house and they take him to the police, escort him to another local authority who's more of like an authority guy, I guess. I don't remember. Or I don't know what this guy's sort of title was, but he was not just a teacher, and he's given a constant police escort, like a cop with him all the time.
Oh. So they're taking this is a credible threat, they believe.
They figure this happened, and there's all these people talking these rumors, and he might be royalty. They don't know what's going on. So they take steps. And now he's living at this local authority's house, and he has somebody there who's a police, sort of like a police type person, keeping an eye on him all the time. Well, one day, April 3rd, 1830, which is kind of a little ways after, nothing's happened in a while. 1829, October 17th. So I guess we're talking about 6 months later or so. Kaspar's in his room, and a gunshot goes off. The police escort, runs in and finds him all alone on the floor with a wound to his head. Like a superficial wound, but a wound nonetheless. Hauser later admits that he had been standing on a chair trying to reach an upper shelf for something and fell. And when he fell, he swept down the wall and knocked a pistol that was like a novelty pistol, whatever, on the wall off of its cradle when it hit the floor, it went off and shot near his head and grazed his head. It's true. This really happened. I know.
It's totally crazy.
It's totally crazy. Which actually, yes, it's very crazy. The incident, which is interesting about this. What's interesting about this, which is when things start to unfold here, is that the incident, which similar to the previous incident where he is hit on the head, happens to coincide with Hauser having recently had conflicts with the people that are looking after him, his wards, and they're beginning to catch him in lies and believe he's being deceitful and believe he's making like extensive excuses for things they've seen in his life that they don't like, and maybe even having arguments. And so it seems when these two major things have happened, something has welled up in his life where people are starting to not believe him. And so a very dramatic thing happens to him, which shifts the paradigm in everything and the perspective. And all of a sudden he's now moved to another house, or people are giving him sympathy. People are worried about him.
He's a center of attention.
Becomes the center of attention again. The attention is taken off of the Kaspar lied. Look what happened. He got hit in the head. This happened. A dramatic thing happens. So people are becoming disillusioned with him the people that are closest to him.
Right.
But at the same time, dramatic things are happening, and the public and other people or officials who aren't there to see what the actual people who are housing him see are starting to see. They jump in and try to help. So this story continues, and about 3.5 years later, things are beginning to unravel. He has been sent by another another benefactor. Who wanted to help and who had some money. He was sent to Hungary to see if he could recognize local architecture or anything rang a bell or whatever. And when he was sent there, he didn't recognize anything. He didn't know anything. And this lord who sent him there in an attempt to try and actually help, this guy gets word back from the people he sent him to, these Hungarian earl or duke or I don't know, who kind of like showed him around, that they thought he was a joke. Like they thought he was so melodramatic. He was very theatrical. He was just seemed to want attention all the time. He was very overt and uncomfortably so. They just kind of was like, this guy's a joke. So things are really unraveling for Hauser. And at this time, his main patron who dies, the guy who's more or less been like feeding him, keeping him alive, paying extra money to make sure, because they there are people who still believe all of this, and he's got benefactors, but they've all grown weary of his deceits and his excuses and his tendency towards all this theatrics and his seemingly schemes to draw attention and things. So he's becoming desperate. Things are starting to really get weird for him. And on December 14th, 1933, Kaspar comes home with a deep wound to his left breast. And he says that he'd been lured to a location by someone claiming they would reveal to him his true story. He met this stranger who handed him a small purse and then stabbed him. Yeah. Yep.
So is this a deep wound? Or is
I think it's deeper than it was intended to be.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a deep wound. It's a deep enough wound because Kaspar dies.
Oh.
So when the police search the garden, he will die shortly after. He dies 3 days later. When the police search the garden where the meeting took place, they find a small purse with a note inside, which is written in reverse. All the lettering is written in reverse. So you have to like hold it up to a mirror to see what it says. And the note states that that Hauser himself will be able to tell the authorities what this man looks like, the man who met him and stabbed him. And this is the person writing the note is the person who stabbed him, and says, Kaspar's going to be able to tell you what I look like, and he'll give you a lot of information about me, but then it gives all these indications of where this person is from, but it leaves gaps, which presumably would be filled in, like lines, which like, I'm from the town of, and near the Bavarian border, and there's a line which way presumably Kaspar would fill in.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, choose your own adventure or whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, just sort of like Kaspar doesn't have to say all these extra 3 words to tell you that to tell you just all he has to do is say this town, he has this color beard or whatever the heck it is. That's all he has to do. And the guy leaves his own initials on the letter. Well, Kaspar dies of his wounds 3 days later, as I mentioned, and which I think pretty much it's universally decided that was not what Kaspar intended, because inconsistencies in Kaspar's story, people start to realize that he also was like he was inconsistent in his story throughout. He was always inconsistent, but he also when he was very excited about them finding this purse. But when they finally found the purse, because of course he dropped it when he was stabbed and stumbled home, he wasn't particularly interested in what was in the purse. Yeah, I know. And then in the letter and in the folding of the letter, all things that like there were things that Kaspar said that were like misspellings that he was commonly made and things like that. So a court of inquiry basically determined that Kaspar probably stabbed himself, probably in a bid to reignite the attention around his story and to maybe secure a new patron, and that his death was probably the result of him unintentionally stabbing himself too deeply.
Which is, and the whole thing is amazing and crazy.
It is.
I mean, so he wrote the note backwards.
He wrote the note backwards.
Right. And I mean, everything about it is bizarre. And
well, you have to think of this is somebody who's, I don't know if some education, certainly smart, but who realizes that the jig is up, right? But at the same time, before that, he's pretty good at, he's figured out that this seems to be working. Like every time I kind of like throw some dramatic fit, my fortunes kind of come back to me.
He could have, with maybe a little guidance, he could have been a politician or a prophet.
Yeah, or Hollywood producer, potentially.
Or a cult leader.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, all of these things.
Really
this kind of personality and this craving of attention and manipulating people is very, very valuable.
I think you'd have made a good high school guidance counselor.
Your real strength here is your crazy ability to manipulate people into believing your absurd
Kasper,
stories.
I've been looking through your folder here, and here's some job choices. What do you think about politician?
That's right. Prophet.
Cult
leader.
Cult leader is a good one. Cult leader. And as I said, I'm not going to rip. I'll only say it once. It's a hard job, but Hollywood producer. That's friend. Right. Consider it. Consider this. Leader of men.
Leader. It's what a crazy story. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of outside of what we've done so far, but it fits nobody was coming to his aid. No. Presumably, if any of what he said was true, in fact, people were trying to get rid of him or shut him up.
I think you're right. But what I'm thinking equally, when you're somebody who's, in what I believed, I personally believe, and I think a lot of people believe, there are still some skeptics, and then the Herzog documentary seems to be a little more on the side of he was actually the son of royalty. But as I recall, but in this case, you're thinking about somebody who this person cannot be helped. They can't be helped because, I guess if there was a psychological evaluation to the level of maybe today's ability to psychoanalyze somebody, and people saw him for who he was and what he was doing, maybe actually learned about his past, maybe he could have been helped. But this is the kind of personality structure that cannot accept any type, sort of a maybe a narcissistic, sociopathic mentality that can't, nothing can be done for this person.
The help that he was given was, here's some room and board, and here's a police presence for a presumed outside threat. When if the threat was inside him, police presence wasn't going to help.
And exactly that. And when I say he couldn't have been helped, that is because he wasn't diagnosed. There's nobody knew, nobody could have, or was able to get to the bottom of before it all was
And
over.
I wonder, with the time that this took place in, is it just that people don't know about these kinds of things? There wasn't, a deep psychological knowledge, or people didn't care, or he had just convinced people enough that they didn't really consider the possibility that the guy has severe mental issues, and that's the real problem.
You're right. I think it's a combination of all of those things, because I think if you, it's likely that this type of diagnosis didn't exist yet. It's likely that that he was a good enough liar to get along. He would have had to be in front of the right people. I think that people honestly were trying to help him. It was a very interesting story, but he honestly seemed like somebody who needed help. And he was more than happy to take that help and benefit from it. But I also think, to give people some, that's all stuff to give people credit. But I also think that, even to this day, a good story is a good story, and people will latch onto it, and they'll put whatever they sort of want to on it to. It's a good story. I want to hear how this plays out, and the actual personal element is sometimes a little less important than whether the story plays out and keeps us interested.
And if the public is adding to the story,
rumors,
that just drives it further along, and also it can make it so that people can look at the story and ignore the reality that this guy needs other kinds of help. Sometimes help isn't really help.
Well, and you're right in saying that, because think about this. Now, all of a sudden, if the local politicians, who maybe they all knew right away, we don't know. These guys might have all been sitting around going, this guy's a fraud. I don't know. But if all of a sudden the populace picks this up and says, hey, this guy might be royalty.
Yeah.
Well, you can't now be that guy. You can't be the guy who went,
Yeah.
this guy's a fraud, and then find out, no, actually, he was the son of the House of Baden, he's the prince. You can't, even if you think this is all hokum and ridiculous, if like half the town's talking about it, you got some political pressure.
If Nuremberg is saying this guy is, royalty, he's been kept in captivity for most of his life, and then you're like, you guys are a bunch of idiots, you're not going to be such a popular person anymore.
Yeah, especially if you are like a local authority.
Yeah.
So he actually is he actually has a statue in Ansbach, Germany, where and he was buried, and his headstone reads, and I love this. His headstone reads, "Here lies Kasper Hauser, riddle of his time. His birth was unknown, his death mysterious, 1833." And then later, a monument was erected in the court gardens where he was stabbed. And is still there to this day. That reads, "Here lies a mysterious one who was killed in a mysterious manner."
That is pretty cool.
Wouldn't that be pretty cool?
Yeah, that's better than the monument for Burke and Wills, right?
Burke and Wills, though, the previous one we did.
If they were honest about that one, it would have been like, here lies, two people who failed at their whatever. Whereas this one's honest.
Failed miserably at their jobs. What's interesting about this, though, is that it also could equally have read, in truth, here lies a complete fraud.
Right.
That, how this is one of those stories that we've told in the past, we talked about, that is basically somebody who kind of gets recognition for having not done anything of significance and, in fact, maybe done the opposite.
Right.
Whereas somebody else could do something extraordinary, and because of circumstances, just be another,
they don't get any recognition.
Just be a footnote,
no statue. Yeah.
Obviously people, a lot of the post death and there's been obviously studies and conversations about this since, and people have said things from like, well, obviously he didn't grow up in this dungeon, he claims, because he would be cognitively stunted, he would be all of the physical ailments, and many people just believe that it's so incredible that anyone believed it from the get-go,
right.
Even got to the point of the public even being able to read into it. But mostly he's considered to be a pathological liar and a swindler, and also possibly having been suffered from Munchausen syndrome, where...
Yeah.
So Munchausen syndrome, as you probably know, it can be Munchausen syndrome or Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And if it's Munchausen syndrome, you tend to fake or create illnesses in yourself so you can get attention. But the actual, and if it's by proxy, you do it to somebody else.
That's right.
But the actual origin of Munchausen syndrome, which is named after Baron von Munchausen, great Terry Gilliam film, The Adventures of Baron von Munchausen, is actually not physical, which typically is how it manifests itself. It is more, it is a mental illness and a syndrome that is, in his case, and potentially Kasper's case, and in Munchausen's original case, is actually to tell, these fantastical tales and to really embellish storytelling and things like that, to that way gain attention.
No, and this would fit perfectly.
And it's a less common version of Munchausen syndrome, but that's one of them. And I think that he could fit that perfectly. Unfortunately, he died too young for us to know.
That is a fascinating story, Mark.
Imagine, like, stabbing yourself is...
Yeah.
Stabbing yourself is not easy to do. Stabbing yourself too deeply...
I can't imagine.
Don't do that.
I mean, this guy was serious about his story.
Yeah.
If that is indeed what...
I think he needed this one to... needed this to be able to milk this one for a while.
He was getting desperate.
Yeah, big time. Yeah. Now this is a fantastical story. It's almost otherworldly, this story. But I think that you had, and this because being of 18 to 28 and on, etc. But you have a story with us today, Kevin, and I think from what I understand is a little bit more timely.
Yeah, this is a more current story, and this story begins in Tokelau, which is a South Pacific island. It's technically a territory of New Zealand. The entire nation has a population of about 1,500, and in this particular atoll, it's a series of atolls, is a Atafu or Atafu. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it. This is where the story really begins, and it has a population of about 541. So this is 1/3 of the nation lives.
And this is basically coral reef.
It's a coral reef.
Wow.
The highest point is about 18 feet above sea level. And being a coral reef, there's no real soil here.
Yeah.
So really, the only thing that really grows there are things like coconut trees.
Right.
And
ideas, from what I understand.
Ideas.
And hatching ideas.
It's an interesting story because it's so similar to the stories of teenagers, I would guess, around the world.
Yeah.
These three boys, two 15-year-olds and a 14-year-old, they are, bored on this island, very small island, that they claim, one of them claimed on Facebook, he called it a hell, one called it a prison.
Which, by the way, and it sounds more prisoner-esque than, where I grew up or maybe where you grew up, but like that's, as you sort of say, that's pretty much what any teenage boy or girl might say. Yeah, we were
like, always, how do we get out of here? This is so boring.
But in this case, they actually live on a soilless heap,
right,
pile of coral,
hundreds of miles from anything, So yeah, and not. Like if you live in the middle of Iowa, 100 miles from something else, you can get in a car and drive to that something else. But when you're in the middle of the ocean, you don't just jump on a boat and go. Like, it's dangerous.
Their prison is a little more prisonery than, for instance.
It doesn't seem like the adults necessarily see it the same way, but I think that's often the case, right? People move to places like where we are, and the adults move there because they're looking to get away.
Yeah,
and the kids are like,
get out of here.
What the heck? This is the worst.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do here.
As you get older, so oftentimes people start to realize that some people start to realize that the fewer people around, the better.
That's right.
Whereas you're younger, and everyone you meet is another experience, and explosive ideas are coming out of you. Yeah.
The more the better.
More of a prison.
And this most of the people on the island fish. That's what their economy is based on. This is their diet has historically consisted of fish and coconuts. Mm-hmm. Now, in modern times, they've started getting shipments of food, a lot of junk food. They now have an obesity epidemic, diabetes. things like that. They're just, eating a lot of
It's so
Cheetos
fascinating because they literally live in a place where all they have is coconuts and fish. And I mean, there could pretty much be an LA diet that would look like that.
They could market this.
They instead, because and it's not uncommon. It's,
right.
It's not there. It's common. Instead, it's like living in sort of like the in farmland in America, Wisconsin or something like that, in rural farmland, and growing all the food, and yet the food you eat is not
healthy.
The stuff that you
and
should
there's these 3 boys. So I'm just gonna tell a little bit about the boys. There's Philo. I think it's Philo. Philo. Filo. It's not uncommon to have the same first and last name.
I like it.
He's 15. He was big and strong.
I don't think I'd like it with my name, Mark. Marky. Don't do that.
No. Philo wanted to play rugby for the New Zealand All Blacks. He's a big guy, strong, good at rugby. He spent most of his life in Australia, but he was sent back to Atafu because he was getting into trouble and hanging out with the wrong kids. And
so he gets an opportunity to go away, and then he acts like a dummy and gets himself sent back to his prison. Well, I guess that's not...
Samu, also big and strong, also like rugby, had never left Tokelau. Basically, so this is a common thing. On Tokelau, somebody has to look after the elders, and that was his job. He was left... His whole family left and went to Australia, and he had to watch after grandma.
Ooh.
Yeah, rough. And then Edwini, he was a much smaller kid. He's 14, and he when asked what he wants to be, whereas the other 2 said rugby players, he said a surgeon. Born in New Zealand, went to school in American Samoa, but lived on Atafu as well. Now they're sitting around on, I think this is October 3rd, 2010. Mm-hmm. They're in the little clubhouse with the other teenagers, and they've got a bottle of vodka. As all good or / bad stories begin, right? For teenagers, alcohol is involved. They're passing the...
Most stories worth telling.
Right, exactly. They're passing the vodka around, and they start talking about this other group of kids, some other teenagers 5 or 6 years prior who had gone off in a boat, gotten lost, and were found 5 days later by the ferry.
Like the ferry that goes over to New Zealand.
Or the ferry that goes between the different atolls. I'm not exactly sure.
Yes, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And so the adults think of that group of kids as fools.
Right.
And they were very mad, and they punished them substantially, apparently. Now, these kids, though, saw them as heroes.
Oh, yeah.
So
that sounds familiar.
They started a lot. The talk begins, and
teenagers around the globe.
Yes.
We're all the same people.
Yep. And one person comes up with a dumb idea, and another kid is like, "That's great," and a third one is like, "Yeah,
once you have a quorum,
right?"
Whatever.
Then, no matter how bad the idea is, it suddenly sounds good.
Hey, I think we're living there. We're living in that right now.
I know.
Let's do this.
How
can we make this worse?
Exactly.
Let's double down on what we clearly realize has been a bad idea from the start.
Yeah, just throwing good money after bad. I guess it never ends, does it? I mean, as adults, as leaders, as entire countries, we're constantly throwing good money after bad. Hey,
Kevin, remember that real bad idea you had yesterday?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take that bad idea and raise you 2 more bad ideas on top of it. And then, I mean, at a certain point, you reach maximum bad idea, and it becomes a good idea, right?
Well, let's continue because what you're talking about there, which is like bad idea on top of bad idea, followed by bad execution, makes for a really good story. And I'm not trying to make light of what happened to these guys. Now, let me just say, they survived.
They live.
Okay. It's amazing. But it was...
it's a story of like tripping over your own shoelaces, but in the end, they're okay, which is good.
Tripping over your own shoelaces after you tied them together intentionally and put a blindfold on, and then decided to walk down a rocky, hillside.
And got drunk on vodka.
Right, drunk on vodka. So they the story, they start, it's becoming serious. We're going to do it. Well, the kids that aren't quite as dedicated to this bad idea start to bow out, and they're like, I got to go home. So eventually it's just a couple of boys, Philo and Samu. But then Edwina chimes in and says, I'm in.
Yeah.
So it's these three decide they're doing it. And kind of the idea is, let's go steal a boat, and we're just going to head for one of the other atolls. And, the worst thing that happens is we get lost and somebody finds us a couple days later.
Because it happened before, and so why wouldn't they think it could happen again? Right.
So they decide to steal Samu's uncle's fishing boat, which is a very small boat. These fishing boats are low. The top of it's only 16 inches above the water. Has a 15 horsepower engine. They're going to go out in the ocean with a 15 horse. This is the equivalent of two people rowing, I think, in 15, power.
Yeah, trolling for trout or something like that.
I mean, it's you probably would never, as a fisherman, never take this out in bad weather. Yeah, you would only take this out when you know it's going to be good and you're going to go out for a half day and you're going to catch a bunch of fish and come back. That's what it's made for. It does have some one good feature, which is that it has these pontoons built into it that are filled with air. So it does really help it, if it was capsized or whatever, it's probably not going to sink.
That's good.
So they have that going for them.
But they don't know that. They didn't think of this. They just find this out.
Yeah, they weren't like, hey, let's think of what's the most seaworthy boat. Because based on what they do, I'm thinking that never crossed their minds. They kind of separate themselves and say, okay, we each got to go get different supplies, for this trip. So they get 20 gallons of gas, one tarp, 29 coconuts, one ceramic teacup.
One ceramic teacup.
Yes.
Yeah.
2 packs of Pall Malls.
It's not a gong.
Right. Not a gong. 2 packs of Pall Malls.
Pall Malls.
Right.
And that actually right there tells you how much they... I don't know how much they smoked. But
it's not going to last long, right? Between 3 of them. Right.
They didn't even get a carton.
No.
They figured this is going to be a day.
Yeah.
2 days. Day and a half.
Right. One jug of vodka. So they're bringing more vodka.
Yeah. These guys don't seem to have much trouble getting a hold of vodka.
Right. Vodka is the one thing that seems really easy to come by as teenagers. 2 bottles of milk, 1 jar of water.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you get more vodka and milk on the open ocean than water.
Right. No fishing gear. Edwina was supposed to go get some, but he was afraid of waking people up, so he skipped it.
Right.
So they are not only going out with very little water, but they have no way to catch food.
And plenty of milk, which that'll keep.
That's right. They had only the clothes they wore, which were shorts and t-shirts and sandals. No one had a hat. Excellent. And no one had glasses. Excellent. So no sunglasses.
Excellent.
Now,
I don't think there's a high school teacher in the world that's listening to this that is in any way surprised.
Well, that's how I am, We get out there and we're hiking and Alexander's like, Dad, did you bring any water? Like, seriously, dude, I told you to bring water.
Right.
I put the water on the counter next to your sunglasses. Oh, I forgot those too.
Yep.
Yeah. So not surprising.
Right.
They head out, and as they're heading out, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're chanting, they're saying, hey, uncle, we stole your boat. And they're just screaming these things. They got primal screams. There's 3 wild and crazy kids heading out for an adventure. Drunk.
Oh, yeah.
And they continue to drink until...
Not hydrated. No food.
They one by one, they start to kind of get real sleepy and tired, and they all pass out. Now, before they pass out, though, they're driving, and they decide to follow a star. Oh. They don't know which star or which direction it is, but follow a star.
Okay.
I don't know how they think this is going to get them to another atoll.
Star is going to...
is the star in the direction of the atoll? I don't think they thought of this again. They're drunk. They're teenagers. There's no planning whatsoever. So they pass out. They wake up in the morning. They can see no land and no stars. So they can't follow the star anymore. They thought so little about their plan that they didn't think about the fact that the next day it will be sunny out.
They're doing
There are seagulls flying around, so they decide
Well, that's a good sign.
that they're going to follow the seagulls.
Yeah, stars,
But
seagulls. Did they
They
decide which
realize the
seagull to follow?
seagulls fly erratically and sometimes just around in circles.
Yeah. You only got you following the seagull.
It's probably following you because it thinks you have food.
Well, and also following the seagull is only useful if the seagull's going home.
Right.
Especially when you only get 20 gallons of gas, which you've probably burned through half of. And so if the seagull's not going home, then following the seagull's a bad idea.
The seagull can fly a lot further than you can drive. It can also just land on the water and float while it wants to take a rest.
That's true.
I mean, you can't do that. So, let's see. Let's kind of the first few days here. I'll just go over how.
Oh, now how many? They were out there for a while.
51 days.
51 days.
51
This is day
days.
one.
Yeah. Now there's lots of other people that have gone out and been in boats for long periods of time, but in an article in Outside, the author goes over some of the other, expeditions that have gone awry, and these people the other expeditions have much more to their advantage. Bigger boats,
Right.
fishing gear.
Yeah.
They're not gone as long.
Right.
They have food, whatever it is. These guys have nothing. Nothing. So day one, I guess it might have been the first night. Edwina has already lost his shirt over the side of the boat. So he is now shirtless.
As you do.
Yeah.
Happens to
Day
me all the time.
two.
Just walking along.
Right.
Where's my shirt?
Yeah, where's the shirt?
Yeah, where'd the shirt go?
In the morning, they realized they couldn't follow a star, as I mentioned. So, they just kind of start going. And to where they don't know, but they're actually running the motor and driving in a direction.
Okay.
An unknown direction.
Committed.
Right. I mean, they could just be making things worse at this point, but they don't really know.
What difference does it make?
They're not too concerned at this point. They're still thinking it's a pretty fun adventure. They find out that most of the cigarettes are wet. There's 6 that are dry, so they smoke all 6.
Right.
They're out of cigarettes now. Mm-hmm. And the boat, because it's so low, waves keep going over the side. Mm-hmm. So whenever they have to sleep, they're sleeping in water.
Yeah.
The first night,
Seawater,
when they wake
salt.
up in the morning, the water is up to their ears.
Oh my gosh. Salty seawater too.
Yes. Right. So as we'll find out, this sleeping in the water is not a good thing day after day.
Yeah. Ask Trenchfoot in World War I.
Yes.
It
gets pretty bad. It gets ugly. On the third day, a plane flies over, and it is a plane that's looking for them.
Oh.
Because the elders on the island are like, they're
the
gone.
boys?
We need to go search for them.
Where's my vodka and my milk?
Now the plane, it turns out they with all the bright sunshine and the waves and the silver boat, they don't see them, even though they fly right over.
Yeah.
Now Edwina is trying to flag it down, but the other 2 boys make fun of him
And he doesn't
tell
have a
him,
shirt to
yeah,
wave.
so he stops waving.
They make fun of him.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Because it's not been long enough. They've decided that 2 days you're not going to be heroic for 2 days.
Excellent.
Lost. So they just assume the plane will be back,
What's fascinating about the story, and I know we're going to hear so much more about it, but what fascinates me about this story is that all of this happened, and if they hadn't made it, we wouldn't know.
Right.
We wouldn't know that the boys made fun of Edwina while he tried desperately on day 2, and they were like, it's not been long enough.
Right. Stop.
And if they hadn't died, or if they had died, if they had died, then we wouldn't know that one kid tried desperately and the other ones made fun of him. And we're like, we haven't been gone long enough. And then, of course, it would have eventually been too long. And they'd be like, oh, we should.
That's why to carry out such a bad plan, you need more than one person, right? I think, generally. Because somebody will always think of something a little bit smarter, and then somebody else has to quash that idea. Like, hey, I was thinking maybe we should follow the path towards, where we know the hot dog stand is. Or, follow the route of the guys that have all the supplies.
Yes.
What's
equally interesting about this, though, is that you also have to have somebody who comes up with an idea that's even dumber. And then they have to be better at arguing, or more in leadership role, better at arguing their dumb idea.
That's right. Somebody has to, because otherwise the person would be like, no, you're an idiot. I'm going to wave this plane down.
But you have such incredible powers of persuasion. Let's just sit down in the boat.
Right. Well, he was the 14-year-old. The other 2 kids are bigger than him, older. Let's see. on day 4, they are out of gas and water.
Yeah.
And they have 11 coconuts left. So in the first 3 days, they've gone through 18 coconuts.
Okay.
So at this rate, they're not gonna have much food.
Yeah.
Day 5, they're down to 5 coconuts. So they're really gonna run out quickly. Day 6, they have 4 coconuts left.
Taking their time on the coconuts, which I guess is what they're starting to think ahead.
On day 5, they're thinking we're only eating 1 coconut. We got to split 1 coconut, 1/3 of a coconut apiece,
a day.
And they're out of water, so all they got that day was the coconut milk.
Wow.
On day 4, besides being down to 4 coconuts, they've also realized they've made a big mistake. And they finished the coconuts.
Yeah.
So day 6, they have nothing out of everything. Day 7, they start drinking seawater.
Great idea.
Which they know is a bad idea.
Always a good idea.
But they just can't help themselves.
You have to.
One guy wants to drink it. The other ones are like, bad idea. And the guy's like, I'm doing it anyway. And the other 2 are like, yeah, so are we. So they all drink seawater.
Bad idea. Bad ideas and bad ideas.
Bad ideas. Now, despite the stormy weather that was forecast, it doesn't rain until week 2. So they have no water other than seawater for several days.
Wow.
And it's sunny, it's hot. They're getting sunburned. They're starting to develop rashes.
Oh yeah.
From sleeping in the water in the sun. They use the tarp to catch rain, and then they share it using that 1 teacup.
Oh my goodness.
Now there's like flakes of skin and the tarp is coming apart. So it's not nice water, but it's better than seawater, I guess. Now the awesome thing is they find 3 more coconuts under the tarp.
They
never lifted the tarp up.
They never looked around the boat they're in enough to see if they had. Well, I guess it was.
They're teenagers. I'm always told, did you look in the cabinet? Yes, I did. I took everything out of it. It wasn't in there.
Did you really?
And Shelby goes and looks, and it's right here, Kevin.
Did you really?
You didn't look. So I get it. They're I'm 48. They were only 15. The coconuts are soaked in gasoline.
Perfect.
And cracked.
Yeah.
But
great.
They eat them anyway.
Seawater, gas-soaked coconuts. Why not?
Yes. Now they can see a lot of fish because as the boat moves through the water, I mean, they're just drifting because they've run out of gasoline. They're just drifting, but the fish follow it, but they're in the water and they can't get them. They have no fishing gear. Birds come and go and
plenty of things to
eat. But they can't get any of them. They do end up eventually catching some fish, and it is fully just coincidental.
Right.
And it's because the boat is a poor choice of boat for this conditions that waves come over the edge of the boat and occasionally drop a fish in there. So they do get what they think is maybe a baby swordfish and 3 minnows.
Wow.
That's what they have to eat for an entire month.
Oh my goodness.
About 7 bites apiece for 1 month.
Wow.
I mean, it's so insane. They are really in bad shape. I mean, they are severely dehydrated, malnourished. Their bodies are starting to consume themselves. I mean, the muscle is just atrophying. They're just looking like, pretty soon they're looking like human skeletons. Eventually, they're catching the rain in this tarp, and eventually Samu accidentally hits the ceramic teacup on the side of the boat, so it breaks. So now they don't even have a cup, so they just have to drink straight out of this tarp. I mean,
the teacup.
Yeah,
the teacup. That's the end of manners.
That's right.
All the delicacy is gone.
They are starting. I mean,
very, very poignant.
They're really starting to talking about manners. They're really starting to lose it with each other. I mean, they're in a small boat. They have nothing to write with, nothing to read. They've probably talked about everything they could possibly talk about, and all they can do is sit here and stare at each other in this teeny boat.
And as you stare, Edwina starts to look a lot like a chicken dinner.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, so eventually
slowly starts to turn into a roast chicken before your eyes.
No, and at this point, before they start talking about things like killing each other,
They do?
with the frustrations of sunburns and rashes, they throw all their clothes over the side.
Excellent.
So they are completely naked.
Perfect.
In the sun and salt water. And they you would think like just, put the clothes under the bench, because when the sun comes out, you might want to put a wet t-shirt over your head or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Edwina is just pretty much starts to think about things like, I could take the motor at night, tie it to my foot, and just jump overboard and end it all.
Right.
He curls up though into a ball and just lays there for weeks, not talking or moving. And
why move? Heck, he's probably doing the best for himself. He's conserving all energy.
And Samu is angry that he just lays there and won't talk, won't respond to them. So he decides, he just jumps up and grabs their machete, which is all rusty now, grabs Edwina and puts the knife to his neck. And he's so mad, he's just going to kill Edwina. And Edwina at this point decides, I don't want to die. Yeah. So now he's changed his mind. He's not going to kill himself. Samu drops the knife. He doesn't kill him. But later on, when Edwina is sleeping again, Samu and Philo talk about killing him.
Ooh, yeah.
And they never do. Nobody kills anybody. And at one point, Edwina mentions a quote from MLK, which is, we must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools.
There it is.
Yeah.
Right there.
And they do. They stick it out. They hang together. They one day they catch a bird. It lands, and one of them is quick enough to grab it.
Machete.
They dry it in the sun, and then they eat everything, including the bones. Ooh. Crush up the bones and eat the bones.
Bone marrow.
And
protein.
And then it rains and they get some water, and it's a good few hours until it just makes it worse, because they've had just enough to make them realize how hungry they really are. They get so desperate, they start to eat the wood of the boat.
Whoa. That's desperate.
That's desperate. Yeah. And Samu and Philo will occasionally jump into the water, but only they just climb over the edge and lower themselves in to cool themselves off.
Yeah.
But one day, Philo sees a crustacean on the bottom of the boat, so he lets go to grab it, and of course the boat drifts away. He's too weak.
And he's so weak.
Yeah, he can't swim back. Samu, who's outside the boat as well, sees this and somehow manages to swim, pulling the boat all the way back to Philo, which is really quite something at this point.
It's pretty amazing, actually. I mean, it is. I mean, you're really talking, okay, we're making fun of these guys because they really shouldn't be out there.
Right.
But at the same, and they made a lot of decisions that, to get themselves there. But at the same time, we have to give them a lot of credit. I mean, not only did they not, they looked at this situation and handled it the way it should have been handled. They started down the wrong path a couple times, but when it really came down to it, they looked after each other. Yeah. They didn't eat the little one.
That's right.
And they started to figure out. And they pulled up a Martin Luther King quote and lived by it. And good for them.
Yeah, I mean they end up on the 51st day. The San Nikunau finds them. This is a boat. I think it's a fishing boat. They drifted more than 750 miles, and they can't believe it. The one
750 miles.
Now, one of them pops his head up and says yes, and I think it was Samu, and he had been known to say, "Oh, there's a boat." And everybody would look, and it would turn out to not.
Oh, that's so rude. That's awful. When people
so they're
do that
not believing him that there's a boat.
Uh-huh.
And sure enough, now when this boat finds them, they see a boat, this little boat, and they say, "Oh, yeah, it's one of those just random boats that you find drifting for some reason sometime."
Some
and then they see an arm pop up, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" And then when they get there, there's emaciated, naked boys standing in this boat.
Amazing.
And they do, they take them out. They're severely dehydrated. They have fungal infections, second-degree burns. They're anemic. They have elevated heart rates, muscle wasting, and widespread infections.
Of course.
They are sent to a hospital in Fiji where they spend a few days, and then they end up staying with a family in American Samoa. And one of the funny things about this is, at one point they just give up. They're thinking we're dead, and they start praying to God sometimes, saying, "We'll be good boys. We promise. We won't do this again." As
I think God knows this at this point.
Right, yeah.
You guys are...
But what's funny is they end up in American Samoa staying with this family, and they immediately start lying to the people they're staying with, drinking beer and drinking alcohol and smoking cigarettes. So they don't last long.
When will we learn?
And asked, about kind of like the profound meaning of this trip. They don't really have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
Now,
none
of them
scared straight.
I don't know. I mean, I think they're still teenagers.
Yeah, you're right.
Teenagers. They're resilient and
always a teenager till you're not a teenager.
That's right.
Yeah.
None of them at the end of the story, none of them live on Atafu anymore. They've all moved elsewhere. 2 are in Australia and 1's in Hawaii.
Wow.
So apparently, Sam, the one does not have to watch after his grandmother anymore.
And the youngest one, did he become
a surgeon?
Did Edwina become a surgeon?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'd have probably known if he had.
You would think so, right?
You'd think that would have been mentioned somewhere.
But this wasn't that long ago. So let's see. You could still be working on it. You could still be working on it because if you're going to become a doctor.
2010, you said this was?
Yeah, and he was 14.
Oh, yeah.
So he'd be 24 now. He'd probably be in medical school
right
now.
Probably for another 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. These boys are total teenagers.
Yes.
They are actually they are the definition of teenagers. Teenage boys. They're the definition of teenage boys.
It's crazy because on the one hand, I want to laugh about it and just talk about how many dumb decisions they made. But on the other hand, I can see myself in there in some ways. I mean, I didn't live on an island nation. I didn't, but
I could see hatching the plan. I don't think I might have done the plan, Kevin. I might have tried the plan.
I know. I would. Look, I had plenty of dumb moments in my life where I'm thinking later on, that could have turned out really, really bad. I was just lucky sometimes that it didn't turn out really, really bad.
I find it really interesting the fact that if aliens were to land on planet Earth and they were to ask, like, how do you define a teenage boy? You could just hand them this story.
Right.
And it would give you about 50, maybe 60% of, no, maybe even more, like the personality of a teenage boy.
Right.
You take away sort of like the chasing, the interest in girls, and maybe that's all.
Yeah.
And this is pretty much a wide swath of teenage boys.
Right. I mean, imagine if they were up in Alaska or the Arctic or something. You just change the boat out for a dog sled.
Sure.
Or a snowmobile.
Yeah.
A snowmobile with not enough gas, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it would be exactly the same story.
Thing. And interestingly, though, because we talked about Kasper Hauser in advance of this, not a teenage boy.
Right.
And that, I think, is where you define that. What's insane here, though, Kevin, is that these teenage boys are probably, and I don't know them, and I don't mean to say that because I don't know, are probably considered to be like normal, mentally healthy teenage boys. Right. Whereas Kasper Hauser, who has this fantastical thing and does something completely fantastical on his own and different, is probably a mentally ill teenage boy.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, I mean, much more interesting in a sense. No offense to the 3 boys on the atoll, but much more interesting in a sense. But truthfully, more unique.
Right.
Because this is not unique. It's exactly as you just said. It's a fantastical story, and thank goodness they survived. And I hope that they later in life find some sort of depth to what happened to them.
Right.
Whatever. But at the same time, they are not unique.
Right.
It's a unique story.
They can really tell their kids when they grow up. No, that's a bad idea.
Right.
And I've done it.
Take it from me.
Right, take it from me.
I don't know a bad idea when I hear one. Take it from me.
That's right.